Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined following a record trade deadline day, 10 trades before the trade deadline ended. Joined by friend in life, none other than the man himself who has his trade reactions on the site for you right now, John Paulsen. Paulsen, how's everything going ahead of week 9?
I think I'm recovered. I was trying to put out week 9 rankings, rest of season rankings as all that was going on at the same time. Refreshing furiously, hoping that the Packers would make a move at receiver. I should have known better. I could have saved myself probably 15 minutes of hitting the refresh button on the twitter.com app. But here we are, post-trade deadline and ready to roll for week 9.
Death, taxes, Packers playing wide receivers that don't matter in 2022. Director of Analytics, Sam Hoppen, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Also, very disappointed that the Packers did not make a move at the trade deadline. I mean, even if they would have sold some assets, I would have been fine with that given where they're at in the division and the conference right now. But what are you going to do? Owning one share of Packer stock can only go so far, and unfortunately that does not come with the ability to make trades.
To be fair, they were in reportedly on Chase Claypool, as we saw Aaron Rodgers melt down live on the Pat McAfee show, as of course the Packers lost the race to the Bears, who instead sent a second-round pick to Pittsburgh to acquire Chase Claypool. And I want to start there as we open the show with our reactions and fallouts from the trade deadline, because we do have Chase Claypool now in Chicago. And Paulsen, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you were viewing Chase Claypool following the trade deadline. And is he someone that, if he's on your waiver wire, because there are shallower leagues who may have dropped him, someone you're looking to acquire?
I think it's worth looking at, depending on who you have on your bench that you might have to cut for him. I don't think that this is necessarily this is not an obvious upgrade for him, going from Kenny Pickett as the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in Pittsburgh to Justin Fields, a more run heavy offense thus far. Wide receiver 2, I guess he could push Darnell Mooney for, number 1 targets, but I don't really see that happening in a half season. Probably would take the off season for that to really happen. I don't think he's like an alpha 1 gonna be type player, not the greatest route runner. Didn't make much of an improvement from his first to second year in terms of his route running, but he did post back-to-back 860-yard seasons for the Steelers the last 2 years. Solid contributor. Probably view him as a fantasy wide receiver 4, unless the Bears are signaling to us that they want to throw the ball more and they want to have more weapons out there for Justin Fields. They have allowed him to throw more over the last month, and his fantasy production has really taken off. So I do view this as an upgrade for Fields. So we're going from Equinemius St. Brown and Dante Pettis to Chase Claypool as a number 2 option there.
And for Claypool, Sam, we know that his average depth of target has dipped now for 3 consecutive seasons. 2, of course, has been Roethlisberger, now with Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. And just a couple of weeks ago, he complained that he was looking for more downfield shots. And at least he has Justin Fields, who leads all starters this year in attempts 20-plus yards downfield. At the same time, though, Darnell Mooney, with no Claypool-like competition around him, has already struggled to get there. Like, Mooney's the wide receiver 73 in fantasy points per game, hasn't had a single top 24 finish on the year. And so really, I think what we're doing is spreading out the opportunity that wasn't there already to both Claypool and Mooney. Thus, like Paulsen said, the real winner here is Justin Fields and really no one else.
Yeah, I would agree that it's a situation, like you pointed out, where Claypool is going to a team with less target competition. Darnell Mooney really the main guy in that offense. David Montgomery had been getting some targets as well, but less targets overall. So it's a bigger portion of a smaller pie. So, I mean, the Steelers had been trending up the last couple of weeks in pass rate over expectation, and we're starting to throw the ball quite a bit more. That's obviously part of it is driven by the fact that they've been in some pretty heavily negative game scripts. And the Bears had been, after week 2, trending up as well, like Paulsen mentioned, but then cratered back down to earth over these last 2 weeks. So it's a situation where, again, to your point, Daigle, I think Fields is the biggest winner here because he'll have another weapon to throw to, certainly an upgrade, I think, over Equinemius St. Brown and Dante Pettis. But Claypool, it doesn't really move the needle for me. I think the biggest winner out of this trade outside of Fields is probably George Pickens, who is going to get a little bit more opportunity now without Claypool and should flourish in the second half of the season.
Could I add that Mooney, he got up such a terrible start. I mean, he had 8 yards in his first game, -4 in his second game, and then 23 yards in his third game. Over the last 5 games, though, he's averaged 67 yards receiving, has not found the end zone, which I think is playing into that low points per game that you mentioned, John. I just think recently he's been a lot better than what they were doing at the start of the year, and a lot of that has to do with the Bears opening up the offense a little bit.
On a week where I'm starting DeMarcus Robinson and KJ Osborn on some teams, sure, let's get Darnell Mooney in there as my wide receiver too. Could care less. I'm looking for any bodies in the Buymageddon of week 9. Also, very quickly, Justin Fields through week 13. I noted in the waiver wire column: Dolphins, Lions, Falcons, Jets, Packers, and then the Bears hit their bye in week 14. So if you're looking for a quarterback out there, and we all are, to get us to the fantasy playoffs and to shuffle and figure it out from there, Justin Fields with this high rushing floor, an increased 5.5 design runs per game the past 3 weeks in particular, the past 2 games, 2 top 5 finishes at quarterback. Justin Fields, I think, is a player that can get you there. What do you think about George Pickens' rest of season compared to Diontae Johnson as well now, Paulsen? Because on one hand, we are assuming the volume is higher. Pickens actually ran more routes than Claypool the past 2 weeks, so I don't know how much that rate increases. But more importantly, Kenny Pickett is dead last in the league in completion rate on throws 10 yards downfield, and it has only completed 26% of his passes 20 yards downfield with 5 interceptions and no touchdowns. Outside of Zach Wilson, he's the league's worst deep thrower. And so I understand if you send more prayers to the heavens, it's a greater chance one is answered, but we really need volume to come through here because these targets are just inaccurate and thus useless.
Yeah, it's not great. You're hoping for the targets to be funneled to the 3 remaining fantasy relevant players: Diontae Johnson, George Pickens, and Pat Freiermuth. But as you mentioned, it's just low efficiency targets right now. If you do look at Pickens, his yards per target from Pickett is a lot higher than Diontae Johnson. So for whatever reason, Pickett and Pickens are vibing a lot better. Diontae Johnson is still getting open. I saw the ESPN Next Gen stat guy. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he tweeted out today that he has the highest open score in their metric. He's also, as we know from Matt Harmon's reception perception studies and charting, that he's one of the greatest route runners in the league. But for whatever reason, Pickett's inaccuracy or just inability to get him the ball on time is causing him to have very high volume in terms of targets, but low production. So he's showing up regularly in our breakout receiver model, and you're hoping at one of these games that he's able to break through and get back to sort of his production that we've been used to the last few years.
Johnson now under 5 yards per target at 4.8 for the season. I think the biggest winner from the trade deadline, Paulsen, is actually Jeff Wilson, who goes to San Francisco, not only familiar with Mike McDaniel from their time in San Francisco, but also this year, the Dolphins, 51% of their running back carries have come from 21 personnel with Alec Ingold on the field. Jeff Wilson is 3rd in the league right now in rush attempts from 21 personnel with San Francisco, averaging 4.3 yards per carry. It's a system he can literally just get dropped into and immediately help out Raheem Mostert, who is not only leading this team in carries and roughly just 30 away from his career high right now, but has handled 70% of backfield touches in 5 consecutive games because there was nowhere else to turn to. Now there's an option they can get involved. What are your prospects on Jeff Wilson rest of season? Because Wilson was dropped in a lot of leagues, and rightfully so, given that he had taken a backseat to Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and I think they were dropping him because, Elijah Mitchell is likely to come back, and I think most fantasy managers are thinking that Mitchell's ahead of Wilson, which he was at the start of the year. When this trade first happened, I was just like, oh, okay, he's going to go be the RB2 in Miami. But, as I'm thinking about it, there is a chance that he could push Mostert for the RB1 job there. Mostert's run pretty well. He's averaging, I think, 4.5 yards per carry this season. Wilson, but he's 30 years old. Wilson is 3 years younger at 27. He's averaged 5.1 yards per carry this season for the 49ers. And, yards per carry has its own faults and everything, but I think coaches still look at that as like, how productive is this player on a per carry basis? So I think there is a chance that Wilson eats into Mostert's workload and could potentially usurp him as the RB1. I doubt that's going to happen very quickly, but that is, you mentioned the big winner. Yeah, I think he is a big winner because he's going from likely RB3 behind Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell to an RB2 role where he's probably going to see 8 to 10 carries as the number 2 back in Miami with a chance for more.
What does this do for Mostert for you, Sam? Since we know after the Edmonds deal, Mostert still leads the team in carries inside the 10-yard line with 4. Alec Ingold, the next man up, with 2 on the team. So where Wilson has thrived in the past, there actually is a vacancy and an opportunity there.
Right. I think, I'm a little bit less bullish on Wilson being able to take over sort of the full-on starting role, but I think Wilson will cut into Mostert's role more than Chase Edmonds did, who was traded away. I think we'll talk about him in a minute, but on the season, Jeff Wilson is averaging 0.83 rushing yards over expectation per carry. Chase Edmonds was at negative 1.6 per carry. So one of the worst running backs by that metric being replaced by one of the best in the position. So that inherently is going to, I think, make the Dolphins want to play Wilson a little bit more. I think Mostert got banged up a little bit in the game. This past week was able to play through it, but it's one of those situations again where Wilson was in that 49er system that Mike McDaniel used to coach in and coaches now, so should be able to fit right in right away and continue to have the level of success he's had with the Dolphins. I think what will be interesting to see is how the potential passing work comes. Now, this Dolphins offense is so concentrated around Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill in the passing game that it's not a ton of volume, but Mostert was starting to take over some of that. I don't think Jeff Wilson really has much of that. So I think if Mostert can hold on to that passing down work, it will continue to make him, I think, a low-end RB2, high-end RB3 rest of season.
Yeah, and can I add that heading into the season, one of the question marks with Mostert was his ability to stay healthy. We've already seen him pop up on the injury report the last couple of weeks. He's at 101 carries right now. He's never carried the ball more than 137 times in a season, and that was back in 2019. He had 104 carries in eight games the season after that. So if you don't believe necessarily that Wilson has the talent to usurp, I'm using usurp a second time in the podcast, Mostert via talent, he's definitely worth an ad just as an attrition play.
The people are going to catch on, Paulsen. Like when I use "that's interesting" as my crutch phrase, they're going to start pointing out you lean on usurp quite a bit. Usurp. Something else that I find interesting is Chase Edmonds being the afterthought throw-in to the Bradley Chubb trade to Denver. And I want to know, Sam, what do you think about this backfield moving forward? Because we know the past 2 games without Mike Boone, Latavius Murray has matched Melvin Gordon with 25 touches each. Murray, of course, has outscored Gordon, though, in that span because he's received 4 carries inside the 10-yard line to Gordon's 2. But now we have someone in Edmonds possibly coming in, soaking up third down reps. You even mentioned in NFL next-gen stats is rushing yards over expected. Edmonds is dead last. We don't expect him to make an impact via early downs, but what are your thoughts on Chase Edmonds joining this backfield?
I mean, the best case for Edmonds is that he's competing with mediocrity. Mostert, I think, is a much better running back, at least that has been this year, than either Gordon or Murray has been for the Broncos. The Broncos offense is a complete mess, as we've talked about numerous times on this show. And it just, I don't think there's really any upside. I mean, there's a chance that Edmonds is on your waiver wire, and I don't think there's any reason to go out and try to get him because, again, he's now going from competing with Mostert, who he couldn't really get much traction with, to now competing against Murray and Gordon, and they keep insisting that Gordon is the starter. They want to continue to use him. They're obviously getting Murray involved, like you said, but I don't really know where Edmonds fits in this unless one or two of those other guys gets injured.
How do you view them when they return, all three of them, from their week 9 bye, Paulsen, given that George Payton, GM, not even the coach, the GM, for whatever reason, had to come out and say Melvin Gordon is still our starter. And then, as we know, Latavius Murray has outscored Melvin Gordon, and now we have Edmonds possibly joining the mix in a worse offense than he was before. People have choices to start in week 10. Curious to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm going to use your crutch word. Interesting how the Broncos in that game in London, late in the game, they were leaning on Latavius Murray in crunch time, not Melvin Gordon. I don't know if that has something to do with Gordon's fumbles this year. He's been pretty good the last couple games, but in crunch time, they were using Murray around the goal line. He got that final touchdown, and as you mentioned, has outscored him. Gordon has run more routes than Murray. It was 22-10 in week 8. And I think the concern here, if you are leaning on Gordon or Murray as the occasional spot start, because that's kind of where they're at right now, is like, desperation RB2 flex type players, and just hoping that they end up with 10 plus touches and a touchdown, is that if they are intending to use Edmonds, it's likely in a passing role. So, those are some high value touches that he could be siphoning away from Gordon and Murray. I don't think that there is a huge risk of Edmonds winning the RB1 job right now, given the way he's played in Miami. But he could come in and be a factor, a little bit more than a factor than what Mike Boone was doing prior to his injury.
In the Buy-Mageddon of 2022, people will have a choice to start Kadarius Toney this week and hope for the best. So curious to get your thoughts on Toney this week, Paulsen, since we really can only go back to last year to see what the young Joker has done. Week 4, of course, when he got his first career start, to the first drive of week 6 when he got injured, 7.5 yards after the catch per reception. That's what we have to go on for Kadarius Toney's career, who has been explosive in his limited opportunity. We assume he's healthy following Kansas City's bye. We have to follow the tea leaves more. But what are you doing in week 9 in particular with Kadarius Toney now on the Chiefs?
Well, usually in these situations where a player is traded, that first week, I call it the finding the apartment, looking for an apartment week. They're not installed in the offense. They don't know what's going on. If they do play, it's usually like a package of plays. You kind of saw what they did with the 49ers did with McCaffrey 2 weeks ago, 30% of the snaps. So Toney coming off of this injury, he claims he's healthy on Twitter, I guess. I don't know what's going on with this hamstring, whether or not he's truly healthy or not. We'll see what the practice reports say. But no, I think he's coming in as the at best wide receiver 4 in the first week. I mean, Hardman's playing well. He scored 2 touchdowns. Valdez-Scantling does something completely different than what Toney does. He runs a lot of clear out routes and everything, uses that speed. And Juju Smith-Schuster has really played well the last few weeks. Obviously, Travis Kelce is the number 1 target in that offense. So what does that leave Toney? And if you're really desperate, I guess you could throw him out there and you hope that they have a package of red zone for him where he gets a couple targets and maybe 2 for 20 and a touchdown or something, or maybe they hand him the ball. But I don't see a big role right now. I think he's competing with Hardman and perhaps Valdez-Scantling for a role in the offense right now.
Rest of season, Sam, because people do have a choice right now to sell high on the idea of Toney as a full-time player with Patrick Mahomes, and perhaps that comes to fruition. But we also know he's the most volatile player to get moved, maybe even in trade deadline history. So what are you doing with Toney given his outlook right now?
I mean, if you can sell high, I think this is the perfect opportunity to do so. It's very likely that you picked him up off of waivers, so there's not much other than the hype that you can really base that around. But the Chiefs in general this year have been an extremely unconcentrated passing attack. Travis Kelce has a 23.4% target share over the last 4 weeks, which is not even nearly as high as I would expect at this point. But between all the receivers that they have, Juju, MVS, Mecole Hardman, Sky Moore, all these guys are just sort of guys. I mean, none of them are true wide receiver ones like Tyreek Hill was for that team, which is why Mahomes is distributing it a little bit more across his options. And as good as Toney is and as he's been when he's been on the field, again, the health is a concern. The first bullet I have under here is he healthy? I am not trusting any player given reports that they are or are not healthy, because the team has the last say as to whether or not he's going to play. And hamstrings, as we know, are one of those things that can be re-aggravated pretty easily. So I would sell high on that. I think he has the opportunity to have more explosive games than he ever would have with this version of the Giants, but it's one of those things where it's going to be spike weeks like we've seen from Mecole Hardman in the past, where it's going to be very, very difficult to predict when that happens and if it is going to even happen.
After chasing a pass-catching running back all offseason, J.D. McKissic backing out from his contract with the Bills, reaching for James Cook in the second round. After the whistle, the Bills finally get their guy in Nyheim Hines from the Colts. Hines, of course, who is going to pass his physical. The trade not official just yet, but assuming he passes, assuming he practices, will be active this week against the Jets, they've already said as well. Paulsen, what are you doing with Nyheim Hines moving forward, knowing that Josh Allen, 13th this year in target rate to running backs, but also this is a receiving back that they hadn't had in the past?
Yeah, this was curious. I mean, I guess not curious trade, given what the Bills have been trying to do over the last, year or so. McKissic, James Cook. But, Cook has 5 catches for 78 yards, 15.6 yards per catch. Not a great catch percentage for a running back, but, a little bit surprising that they would go out and make this trade. Hines has a pretty hefty contract, if I remember correctly. Colts just signed him to that. So I was kind of curious that the Colts decided to move him after saying all offseason they wanted to use him as a receiver. So I think you're looking at Hines rest of season. I think it's an upgrade for him in that he's a more appealing attrition play if there's an injury to Singletary in that offense, given the way that the Bills play and that they're so pass heavy, that you could easily see him come in and see 15 touches, 5 of them catches as the lead back if something happened to Singletary and you're catching passes from Josh Allen. And then I think the offensive line's better, so that's good. The Colts offensive line has taken a huge step back this year, which is part of the reason that Jonathan Taylor is struggling. So I think for Hines himself, it's an upgrade. It's an upgrade for Josh Allen, not that he can go any higher, but he's got another really dangerous weapon to throw to. Swapping Moss for Hines definitely signals that they want to throw to their running backs a little bit more.
Sam, I would imagine this makes Devin Singletary touchdown or bust, and the floor is now worrisome moving forward, since Hines, of course, has led all running backs this year with a 21% slot rate.
I mean, the floor for all these Bills running backs has always been pretty low because of how much the Bills pass the ball and the fact that they don't really pass it to the running back position at all. Singletary leads the team right now this year with an average of 4.3 targets per game. That's among the running backs specifically, and is running a route on just over 50% of the team's dropbacks. So I think this is honestly a situation where Nyheim Hines is probably the biggest and best sell high candidate right now, because his perceived value in my mind is going to increase the most, because he's going from an offense that we've seen struggle to move the ball to an offense that is one of, if not the best in the league. But if you look at the way that the Bills use the running back position, and again, like, they have been looking for this type of running back for some time now, so maybe that changes things. But I think Josh Allen is also potentially set in his ways to an extent, and he always has the ability to scramble instead of taking the check down like Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz had in the past in Indianapolis. And, I'm looking ahead at the Bills' upcoming schedule, and they play the Jets, the Vikings, the Browns, the Lions, and the Patriots for the next several weeks. And I don't see any of those teams really pushing the Bills to, play in any sort of come from behind script. Now, again, they're passing the ball, and they pass the ball a lot when they are up. But we saw on Sunday Night Football against the Packers, when it was pretty much out of hand, they were a little bit more conservative, and they weren't as up tempo as they are at times. So I think Singletary and Moss are still going to continue to be involved. And for a team that just does not give a lot of high value touches to its running backs, it's not an ideal landing spot, in my opinion, for Nyheim Hines going forward.
And we have to wait and see about James Cook, since the Bills had no issues healthy scratching Zach Moss and going with 2 running backs on game day for 2 consecutive games. I was going to skip past TJ Hockenson, if only because, Paulsen, he's a player that everyone started every week and became a player that everyone starts every week. So it's like, okay, nothing changes. But you want to talk about the micro-analysis of his upgrade. I'm assuming that's the direction you're going to go with the Vikings. So I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think it's not so much an upgrade for Hockenson, but it's an upgrade for Kirk Cousins, who has a better tight end to throw to. Irv Smith has a high ankle sprain and is likely to miss a month plus, which I think prompted this move. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the Lions, where do these targets go? Because, you got Brock Wright as likely the starting tight end there, although he was concussed last week. So they've got another young tight end likely to start this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown's floor raises a little bit. And you even have players like Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond who are benefiting as they try to get DJ Chark healthy. Jamison Williams is not healthy. And maybe you see a little bit more DeAndre Swift as a receiver. Jamal Williams caught 3 passes last week, which was new for him. He hasn't been catching a lot. I mean, he's a good pass catcher, but he hasn't caught many passes with the Lions. And I still think he's starter capable right now, even with Swift back in the lineup. But, that's a big name to be moving at trade deadline. And it's a big move by the Vikings, who I think see an opportunity with the Packers struggling so badly to win the NFC North and to try to make a Super Bowl run. I mean, I think all the joy that I see from Bears fans and Vikings fans at the Packers' demise, I just would like to remind everybody that we will be toasting the Vikings when they are inevitably knocked out of the playoffs, and the Bears when they don't make the playoffs. So just wanted to send those good vibes out to the rest of the NFC North.
You just wanted to talk to the fans of the NFC North. That's all you wanted to do with the TJ Hockenson segment. And remember, Hockenson was out last year, injured, whenever Amon-Ra St. Brown went on that torrential league-winning tear for us for fantasy. So I would imagine, these targets just go right back to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who, when healthy, already has a higher floor, hasn't dipped below a 25% target share yet in his full games this season. Let's move on to some rankings debates for week 9, because Jonathan Taylor, Sam, missed Wednesday's practice. Doesn't mean anything. Could still play. Jonathan Taylor, of course, who also continues to let everyone down and basically not scoring touchdowns with that ankle injury. But with Nyheim Hines being moved, we also know Deon Jackson, last time we saw him a couple weeks ago start for both Taylor and Hines, was the RB1 overall in the week, 22 touches with 10 targets. My question really, though, is, do you think it's the same outlook for Deon Jackson with Sam Ehlinger under center? Established the runs. Pat Thorman noted that last week the Colts didn't run a single play from no huddle. Colts also dipped down to 54 plays in week 8 compared to 70 plays per game the past 3 weeks in an up-tempo offense. So what is your outlook for Deon Jackson, whether Jonathan Taylor plays or not? Let's play both scenarios.
Right. There were some differing opinions on the Colts moving Nyheim Hines. Some people thought, that means they're confident that Taylor's injury has healed. They're comfortable with where they are moving forward. Some other injury analysts that I follow have also said this is probably going to be a lingering thing for Jonathan Taylor the rest of this year. But Jackson clearly has the passing game chops that I think Hines does. Again, the 10 targets he had in that one game that Jonathan Taylor missed was huge, ran around on 50% of the team's dropbacks. Now, I don't think we saw Ellinger scramble that much in the game last week against Washington, but that certainly is a part of his game that, again, Matt Ryan did not have whatsoever. And I think with a younger quarterback like that will tend to scramble and try to run for the first down, then look for his outlet, I guess, in the flats there. But we've also seen that quarterbacks with a rushing ability inherently increase the efficiency of their running backs from their rushing perspective. So I think it's with Ellinger, it's a bit of a wash, I guess. Like it doesn't really, the Jonathan Taylor being in or out is the biggest thing, I think, for Jackson's opportunities and role going forward. And the Colts offense is probably a little less efficient with Ellinger than with Matt Ryan, but there are so few weapons in this offense outside of Michael Pittman. I mean, Paris Campbell and Alec Pierce are fine, but Jackson, I think, certainly has the chops to be an every down back for that offense. And the Colts want to see him like that when Jonathan Taylor isn't playing.
Assuming Taylor is out, let's play that hypothetical, Paulsen. Where would you have Deon Jackson ranked for week 9?
He certainly would be a sneaky start. The issue, I think, with Jackson, dialing him up is that the Patriots are first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. But this week, with all these teams on bye, I don't think it matters. You got to get your players out there that might get 15 plus touches. You're going to be starting them. He had touch counts of 17 and 22 in weeks 5 and 6. He gained 212 total yards in that span with a touchdown. Looked really good. So I think that was part of the reason why they were comfortable letting Hines go, is that they knew Jackson could fill that role or Taylor could fill that role. I think, the Hines moving on does enhance Taylor's outlook a little bit if he catches some more passes. But just for this week, Deon Jackson would probably, be pushing for low end RB2 ranking if Taylor is out. And, I would just add on Taylor that this is a re-aggravation of the right ankle injury from a few weeks ago. So, there's no telling whether or not he's going to play this week. Missing a Wednesday practice is not a huge deal, but it is worrisome when it is this situation where he's re-aggravated an old injury.
Another player people will have a choice on in week 9, especially, is Isaiah Pacheco, because remember, before the Chiefs bye, Pacheco gets his first career starts to the same committee usage basically we saw in the past. Outcarried Clyde Edwards-Helaire 8-6, didn't see a single target to Jerick McKinnon's 3. But Andy Reid reportedly sat down with Eric Bieniemy over the bye, and they discussed how they can get Pacheco more than 10 reps in a game without actually throwing their game plan for a loop. So we expect Pacheco to start and possibly his role increase further and separate himself from Clyde Edwards-Helaire in particular. So what do you think about Pacheco's outlook for week 9, Paulsen?
Well, it's just almost the same old with this backfield. Even though we got the start, you were expecting a big shift in perhaps playing time. And he only played 30% of the snaps, saw 8 carries, did not get targeted. And actually, Jerick McKinnon played the most snaps in this backfield. Now, coming off the bye is when we often see rookies see their workload increase significantly as they have 2 weeks to sort of plan for their next attack. And if your reporting there, John, is accurate in that Andy Reid wants to get him more involved, then we should be expecting 10 plus touches. Does 10 reps mean 10 touches, you think, John?
That's the word they used, was reps, which is also confusing to me. And again, it's like the Rams situation, right? Everyone, like in my waivers Q&A in Discord, everyone asked about Ronnie Rivers, who I didn't prioritize in the rankings in the waiver column. And it's because, as long as it stays a committee, it doesn't matter, unfortunately. Rivers had 12 touches, led the team, 52% of backfield touches. He was the RB 48 because how poor that offensive line is, not to mention Kyron Williams may be coming back. Also, they didn't trade Cam Akers. Reportedly, we found out Wednesday morning because they're talking with his agent in a way to bring them back onto the team. So we're just never going to figure out the Rams running back, which is okay. It means I can separate them from my life altogether. But for the Chiefs backfield, yes, that's my question too, because if it stays a three-headed timeshare, unfortunately, I don't think it matters for Pacheco. And Sam, as you know, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was getting there off of touchdown luck. And we're now seeing that touchdown regression, which we expected to come eventually, making him more of an RB3 or 4, especially if he's going to not have as many touches as Pacheco. So just a volatile and crazy situation overall.
For sure. And, it's interesting because I have a start-sit decision with Pacheco and Hines in a team I manage with Connor Allen. And he pointed out we should start Pacheco. And I was like, yeah, like they have a matchup against the Titans. Like they should blow them out and it should be a good positive game script for Pacheco. But that's what they had against the 49ers in this one game that he started. And he still only played on about 27% of the team's snaps, which is fewer than CEH and Jerick McKinnon. So it's a bit of a tortoise and the hare situation where, like, earlier in the season, Pacheco was really only getting involved when there were blowouts. And now is he just not going to be involved when they're blowing teams out? So it is one of those situations where, again, you're hoping for Pacheco to fall into the end zone if you are going to start him. They are a very good offense, similar to what I mentioned with the Bills, in that they have an opportunity to score on any given drive. So there's more touchdown equity in that team than a team like the Colts or some of these other weaker offenses. So it's, I don't know, it's very tough because you probably, I think, have better options than Pacheco at this point. If, again, you've lasted this long without starting him. And I think there are other players with higher floors than him, but he might be, I don't want to say near the top, but certainly in the range for being a top 12 running back if things go his way.
And just to chime in on your lineup decision, I would, run Pacheco out there, considering the coming off the bye, the discussion with Andy Reid, and Hines just being traded. I think that this week,
that's what we're doing.
Tougher.
And we've seen James Robinson play 22% of snaps his first game. Christian McCaffrey only played 28%. Like, every player has been traded has been limited that first game because, of course, they have to turn around the playbook in 6 days. So I don't have too much hope for most players that got traded immediately. Jeff Wilson is the exception since, again, he knows the playbook. Josh Palmer is also interesting for Week 9, Paulsen, because we know before the bye, Mike Williams suffered that high ankle sprain, expected to be out 4 to 6 weeks. Keenan Allen, although I expect him to play this game, was not participating in individual drills with that hamstring injury he went into the bye with to start the week. Assuming Palmer's cleared from concussion protocol, what do you view Palmer as for fantasy this week and for the next month, honestly, without Williams?
Well, you want to like him, right? You want to, plug him in and be, supremely confident. He has looked good at times. He's been a little disappointing at times, but I'm looking at his game log. He's had 3 games where he's played 87% of the snaps or more, which, you would assume that with Williams out, that he'd be a near full-time player. 4 for 30 and a touchdown on 8 targets against Kansas City, 6 for 99 on 9 targets against Jacksonville. Those are weeks 2 and 3. And then week 6, his last game, 9 for 57, on 12 targets. Not great yardage production, but a decent PPR day with those 9 catches. I think they have to use him. The DeAndre Carter is the other option, in 2 receiver sets. We don't know if Keenan Allen is fully healthy or if he's going to be back. I mean, I would think he's back this week. Gerald Everett, the other guy. But, I mean, you're looking at a 32nd ranked, last in the league, adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers, Falcons defense. I think Palmer is certainly a quality start. You just were hoping to be more productive in some of these games where he's played so many snaps. He's got a great quarterback and they need him. But, you're looking at 8, 9, and 12 snaps or targets in those 3 games where he played 87% or more of the snaps. That's a pretty good workload for a player that might be available in the waiver wire, probably not. But if you're on your bench and you need him during the bye-apocalypse, you can use him with confidence.
Any hope for really the Chargers offense turning around here, Sam, post-bye, since Justin Herbert's still 25th in average depth of target, but the volume's there with 48 pass attempts per game?
I mean, I'd like to think so. The Falcons, like Paulsen pointed out, are just not that great of a defense overall, but we also sort of thought that same thing with the Seahawks a couple of weeks ago. Now, the Seahawks defense has turned it around quite a bit and have shut down a couple of offenses over the past several weeks. And I do think with the status of the Falcons secondary, not sure if A.J. Terrell is going to be back, and I think they just traded away one of their safeties as well. So I think, again, coming off of the bye, I'm more confident than I have been that this is a potential get-right game for the Chargers. I think this has the potential for a shootout as well. The Falcons, the Chargers defense has not been that great, and the Falcons offense, despite how frustrated we are with them, has been able to move the ball and move it efficiently. So I think there's an opportunity. I would really like Palmer as a start of this week, especially if you are struggling with some of the buys.
And Palmer, of course, one start last year with Keenan Allen without Mike Williams, 17% target share, 5 catches and a touchdown. So there is maybe some hope there if all return healthy from the bye. People have a choice to make with Joe Burrow, the QB1 overall in weeks 6 and 7. Jamar Chase gets injured. The Bengals do not lean as much on 3 wide sets and 11 personnel as we thought, as Mike Thomas ran a route on less than 50% of dropbacks. It was primarily Tyler Boyd, Hayden Hurst, and T. Higgins. Higgins, of course, who was blanketed also by Cleveland secondary, who was out there. But more importantly, Burrow finishes the QB 20, and everyone's now panicking. Paulsen, what are your thoughts on Burrow rest of season without Jamar Chase? Because even though the Bengals have a week 10 bye, I believe, coming up, it's very ominous about what is happening to Chase, because they didn't put him on an IR, even though he's dealing with a slightly fractured hip, which still makes me concerned for him returning literally at any point this year.
Well, that's an interesting take. I mean, I read it like they're not putting him on IR, so they think that he might be back within that 4-week window. That's how I'm reading it. Hip injuries are a little strange. Yeah, we don't have a lot of data on that. Talking to Adam Hutchinson about it, he's still trying to gather what info he can. This is an unusual injury. But the fact that they believe that he might be back within 4 weeks is interesting, to use your phrase. Now it's becoming my crutch phrase, but I'm not too worried about Joe Burrow. I think, sometimes you get into these interdivisional games and defenses study the quarterback so much that they have a pretty good read on him, and he struggles for a game. But I mean, you're looking at their upcoming schedule. Carolina this week, they got a bye, and then they come out Pittsburgh, 24th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, Tennessee 26th, Kansas City 29th. They don't have a bad matchup. He doesn't have a bad matchup until week 17 against Buffalo. And even that game, you could see him scoring because they have to play catch up. So I'm not worried about Joe Burrow. I am not too worried about Jamar Chase in terms of, reading the tea leaves with this IR. And even if he is out or misses extended time, they do have Higgins. They do have Boyd. Hayden Hurst is pretty solid. They threw the ball to Joe Mixon a little bit more. I mean, there's enough weapons in that offense to allow Burrow. Maybe he's not a top 3, top 4 type option without Chase, but he's certainly QB1 in today's fantasy landscape. Any
thoughts on the Bengals game script, Sam, in their first game without Jamar Chase? And again, tougher matchup. Burrow eats 5 sacks. Maybe that was strictly just a relative opponent performance more than we should start worrying without Chase.
Yeah, I do think it's not a panic situation for me quite yet. Higgins and Boyd are 2 still very competent receivers who should be able to help lift Burrow's fantasy potential. I think, again, Paulsen pointed out the schedule that the Bengals have coming up. So I'm not panicking yet. I mean, if you think about like some of the other options that you're going to go with at quarterback, I mean, maybe Justin Fields is a better option for the next couple of weeks, like you pointed out earlier in the show, Daigle. But I don't really know who else you're going to potentially replace Burrow with. So if you are struggling at quarterback, I think this could be a potentially buy low. Now, I'm not like going out of my way to do it with Burrow, but because he had this bad game, they do have a bye in week 10. You need to account for that, but that is inherently going to make his value the lowest it's been all season, or at least over the past couple of weeks. So again, if I have him on my team, I'm not actively shopping him or looking for alternate options. But if I'm in one of those situations where I don't currently have a long-term plan at quarterback, he's someone that I think you could be targeting right now.
Courtland Sutton, third on the team in targets behind Jerry Jeudy and Greg Dulcich since Dulcich was activated 3 games ago. On the field this year, Jerry Jeudy has a 19.5% target share to Courtland Sutton's 17.9% when playing together. And given Sutton's recent performance, having yet to reach 30 receiving yards in any game these past 3 weeks with Dulcich activated, we are now in a situation where we're even asking in the Buymageddon, I don't know if I could start Courtland Sutton, to be honest. So, Sam, let's start with you. What do you think is happening here? What are you doing here with Courtland Sutton rest of season?
Courtland Sutton, for me, again, is another buy candidate. I mean, we have seen a shift over the last couple of weeks with Jerry Jeudy having a higher target share, while Courtland Sutton was sort of the clear favorite target for Russell Wilson at the start of the season. But Courtland Sutton has 9 end zone targets and just 1 touchdown to show for it this year. So that, I think, inherently will come around and he'll start to see some regression. Now, again, it's not super appealing to put someone like that into your lineup who hasn't produced the last couple of weeks, like you mentioned. But again, I don't know how many better options your team probably has if you have Sutton on your team and have been relying on him. He does have a 17% target share over the last couple of weeks, which isn't terrible, but not great either. He's still running a route on over 90% of the team's dropbacks. So it's one of those situations where, again, you have a couple week lull and it doesn't look great. It's a tough pill to swallow to put him in your lineup, but I do think Sutton and Jeudy are 2 of the really only options, and then Dulcich as well, to provide some fantasy value in this offense. And if you are struggling at receiver, I think Sutton is someone you can get pretty cheap right now.
Are you also holding Sutton through Denver's bye, Paulsen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't cut him. You could bench him and hope things kind of turn around. But I think coming off this bye, this is a chance for the team to sort of regroup. They got to win in London, and coming back after doing all the high knees in the aisle and everything for Russell Wilson, exciting for them to come back and sort of regroup. And his air yards are down. They're at 61.7, I think, over the last 3 weeks using Sam's player stat explorer. For the season, it's up closer to 90. So he has, dipped in that range, but he's also popping in our breakout receiver model. So definitely the under performance on the usage is there. And, he's definitely a candidate to bounce back after this bye. I think he had a bad drop in London, and it just needs to sort of regroup. He's a good receiver. We've seen it over the years that he could produce. It's not like we're dealing with a rookie here. I would, you may be coming out of the bye, you're not looking to start him if you can avoid it, but he'll probably be ranked in the 20 to 30 range next week.
Because the Eagles are so damn good at football, especially against a soft schedule, Jalen Hurts, just 2 of his 10 passing touchdowns have come in the second half. Dallas Goedert, 32% of his targets have come in the second half. this team has literally been able to afford to just take the wheels off and coast to wins. And that's been limiting their ceiling altogether. What do you think about Dallas Goedert's prospect moving forward, Sam?
So Dallas Goedert is sort of the opposite of Courtland Sutton. He does not have a single end zone target this year. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith essentially hoarding all of those for the Eagles, but he's still the tight end 8 on a PPR points per game basis, is one of just 5 tight ends with a target share above or of at least 20%. And he's past his bye. So he's one of those guys that you can potentially get on the cheap and plug him into your lineup and not have to worry about the tight end position for the rest of the season. I don't think he probably doesn't have the same ceiling as what we thought earlier in the season. But again, if he has the ability to fall into the end zone twice, given how good this Philadelphia offense is. And we saw this past week, I think, I don't remember if it was on this podcast or another one, of someone asked me is who's going to push the Eagles to perform? Well, it's like, we don't need them to push them. Like, it would be great if they could, but they still put up a ton of points against the Steelers. And a lot of these players had some solid fantasy games, and Goedert is averaging an outrageous 9.8 yards after catch per reception and is just getting force-fed the ball in some of the shallower targets, but has been able to break tackles and have some longer gains. So I think he's the third option in this passing offense. They are still passing it when they are ahead, which is good to see. And I do think that Goedert, again, doesn't have the ceiling, I think, of a Travis Kelce or a Mark Andrews when he's healthy, but among sort of those second tier options is probably the one that's most affordable at this point.
Thoughts on the Eagles, Paulsen, if you have any, since they're just good.
Yeah, that's a good point by Sam. Like, it might be possible that he might be a buy low and that he hasn't caught a touchdown since week 3, but in this offense, touchdowns should come. And I'm not worried about his second half performance. I mean, it'd be nice if they were pushed a little bit and were, winning some 38-35 type games so that they just had to keep their foot on the gas. But you're looking at their upcoming schedule: Houston, Washington, Indianapolis, Green Bay, Tennessee. They're going to probably just roll over a lot of these teams. You get the Giants in week 14, Chicago, Dallas in weeks the fantasy playoffs. So these aren't bad matchups for him. And with the current fantasy landscape at the tight end position, you're getting 4.6 catches for 60 yards, 5.7 targets per game. He's your starter. You just lock him in, and you're happy you have him. He's a top 5 option. And maybe the touchdowns haven't been there, but think about this guy's role in this offense. And how many touchdowns they do score. He's very likely to see some touchdown regression over the second half of the season.
Let's get into some charts for everyone, because Sam, I know you want to talk about the Patriots running backs, in particular, Damien Harris on a Wednesday, not practicing. And honestly, given his touches the past 2 weeks, I think he's been banged up. I think he was brought back too early, but curious to get your thoughts on their usage and what you're seeing.
I would agree as well. I mean, he suffered the hamstring injury ahead of week 6, missed that game, and then came back in week 7. They said he was going to be out multiple weeks, but again, returned just after missing just 1 game. And you see Ramondre Stevenson up on the top right of this chart here. We have high value touches per game on the x-axis and snap percent on the y-axis. And even with Harris healthy in the beginning part of the season, Ramondre Stevenson has still sort of been the lead guy, at least from a snap share perspective. He has, I think, just 1 game below a 60% snap share this season. And Harris doesn't have a single game above 45% of the team's snaps. So it's just kind of amazing to see that now come to fruition. Again, with Harris's injury, Stevenson has gotten a slightly bigger workload altogether, again, averaging 8.7 high value touches per game over the last 3 weeks. He currently leads the team in target share over those past 3 weeks, and that's the third highest among running backs over that span. So the fact that he's getting all of these targets and high value touches is just massive for his value. I mean, I think Stevenson is a locked and loaded RB2 the rest of the way, and I don't really see many situations where Harris cuts into his workload much more than he already has.
Any thoughts from this chart or on the Patriots backfield, Paulsen?
Yeah, I think Stevenson is the clear lead back there. Now that this is the Patriots, and they could change at any time, and there might be something going on with Damian Harris that we don't know. But it looks like he's more of the change of pace RB2 right now after coming back off that hamstring injury, which is unfortunate for those of us that drafted him because he was very involved prior to the injury, and now it's basically he's been Wally pipped by Ramondre Stevenson. Younger viewers, listeners would have to look that up. But the other player that is popping out here that's made me think is Eno Benjamin. You see where he's sitting there, next to Josh Jacobs and Dalvin Cook. Very likely to see James Conner back this week, and I want to know, how are they going to treat Conner relative to Benjamin after Benjamin had a bad game, then a really good game, then a bad game in terms of running the ball. Was very involved as a receiver all 3 games, but are they treating him now as the starting back? I don't think so. I think it's going to be Conner, but this chart could be a signal that Conner is a buy, or for the rest of the season could show some surprising production if he can take over this usage from Benjamin. I guess the counter argument to that is that Benjamin is seeing all these touches and could continue to see those touches in this offense.
For those not watching live, 1 p.m. Eastern with us on Wednesday, this chart also shows Leonard Fournette in the realm of Ramondre, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey. And it's worth noting Todd Bowles, after that game on Thursday, came out and said that after Leonard Fournette didn't have a carry following the first drive of the third quarter, Bowles said they actually want to get back to establishing the run more. So I actually think we get a lot more touches for Fournette, even though this team is dead last in the league in yards before contact per carry.
They can't run the ball.
What are they doing?
They haven't totaled more than 75 rushing yards as a team since week 1. They're a disaster running the ball.
So
but Leonard Fournette's touches, they're safe.
I will add to Paulson's point about Conner potentially being a buy. The Cardinals on the season are currently 9th in team high value touches per game given to their running backs. So the running backs are involved when they get close to the goal line and somewhat in the passing game. So I do think that is something to be monitoring. If Conner is given his normal workload, then definitely a buy, in my opinion.
Let's discuss some trending wide receivers, because we now see, since Robbie Anderson and Christian McCaffrey were both sent packing, DJ Moore has 21 targets the past 2 weeks for a 38% target share. What are you seeing from the Panthers wide receivers from PJ Walker, Sam?
I mean, almost every analyst out there left DJ Moore for dead. He had a 4-game stretch with just 14 catches and 118 receiving yards. Now, in his last 2 games, he's had 13 catches for 221 yards and 2 touchdowns, including what should have been the game winner against Atlanta this past week. But his route run percent dropped to a season low 73.9% in week 6, but he's run a route on 97% of dropbacks the last 2 weeks. I think he's back to that low end or wide receiver 2 or high end wide receiver 3 range right now. I mean, PJ Walker is looking like the best, probably potentially the best quarterback the Panthers have had in a while. But the other person I want to mention is Terrace Marshall, who has run a route on 91.7% of the team's dropbacks in the last 2 games. He's only earned 12 targets, and I think that's because of the Panthers leaning a little bit more run heavy. But I do think in an offense that's currently void of talent outside of DJ Moore, he's worth a speculative ad in some deeper leagues. And again, if you're struggling for wide receiver production, could fill in these bye week messes. He does have 3 end zone targets over the last 2 weeks, which is great. He hasn't converted either of them to a touchdown yet, but again, someone certainly willing, someone to pay attention to going forward.
Back-to-back games with season highs in target share for Terrace Marshall as well. Paulsen, someone that I actually don't mind starting given all the buys in week 9.
Yeah, I'm glad that Sam said that almost every analyst wanted to cut bait on DJ Moore, because I did not. I was still a hold for me throughout all that nonsense we were seeing. And PJ Walker is interesting because over 8 yards per target prior to taking over as a starter this year, had a bad first week with Moore. He started to get a little bit depressed, but over the last 2 weeks, they bounced back. He's averaging 8.52 yards per target in his career targets, 2 more. So these two, like, is whatever deficiencies Walker has, he does vibe well with Moore. They do have a good rapport, and he is producing. As for Terrace Marshall, I did see that he's had some really bad touchdown luck. He was a player, and this is somebody to watch because he came out of college. Matt Harmon really thought he was a good route runner, was high on him as a rookie. He obviously had a terrible rookie season. And I was talking with Matt about like his process and did that change anything with him? He's just like, I don't know what happened with Marshall. Still, holding out hope that he can get it going, because typically Harmon's college to pro route running charts are pretty well correlated, in that if they're good in college, they should turn into a good pro. And watching Marshall now with Robbie Anderson out of the way have a chance to at least start and draw some targets and get some snaps under his belt. It's good to see. So these are 2 different types of players. I mean, DJ Moore, you were talking about perhaps cutting him in a very, very shallow league where you have short benches, but whereas Terrace Marshall is more of a 12-team, 16 or big bench, 12-team, 14-team type league where you might actually plug him into the starting lineup if you're desperate.
You also want to discuss the Titans wide receiver, Sam, which I am curious about. What the hell are you trying to sell me on the Titans wide receivers? Let's see this chart and hear it.
I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I mean, I think you can drop every part of the Titans offense outside of Derrick Henry and probably Dontrell Hilliard, just as a handcuff to Henry. They've given Henry 90 carries over the last 3 weeks combined. The Titans have dropped to a negative 20.7% pass rate over expectation in their last 3 games. Obviously, a function of that was Malik Willis's first start this past week. He only threw the ball 10 times, but the Titans were already trending towards being more run heavy. And so again, I don't even know if any Titans receivers show up on this chart, to be honest, but if they do, they certainly don't belong there. And I think it's time to just cut bait on everyone outside of the rushing game in Tennessee.
Where would you put Malik Willis against the Chiefs if you were to start again, Paulsen? Because Willis only threw 1 pass in the second half against the Texans. They could afford to hide him. Against the Chiefs, though, given how poor this secondary is for Tennessee, you can't hide Willis. Like, he has to throw. And so it's a double-edged sword. That's where I've come down on, because at one hand, he does offer the rushing upside. On the other hand, he had 14 dropbacks against the Texans. He took 3 sacks and threw a pick.
They don't have. There's no rule that says you have to throw when you're behind. The Falcons have proven that they don't. You don't have to do it.
The Packers Sunday night
ranked,
too.
Yeah, I have him ranked 25th out of 26.
Yeah.
Starting quarterbacks this week. You could see a path if they do fall behind. I think if they're going to be competitive, it's going to be so much Derrick Henry, Dontrell Hilliard. Just running the ball down the Chiefs' throats. They're able to stay competitive that way, and they'll just continue to do that. If they fall behind, then you're putting a young, inexperienced quarterback in a position where the defense is teeing off on him, and he doesn't have many receivers to throw to. The only thing I would mention on the Tennessee passing game is, Robert Woods did see 8 targets a couple games ago with Ryan Tannehill. He only saw 4 in the last game with Ryan Tannehill. he's not a good option, but he is bench worthy in deeper leagues because with Treylon Burks still out with this foot injury and Tannehill taking some snaps at practice today, it's possible that they'll need Woods to produce here over the next month or so if you're hurting at receiver. I'm not confident in starting him, but he is a player that, as the number one receiver in that offense over the next month, he might be useful.
Let's get into some quick hitting questions to help set everyone up the best we can on a Wednesday for their week 9 matchups. Let's assume with the bye following Monday night's matchup for the Ravens, they only have one game in the next 19 days, so they can afford, if they choose to, sit Mark Andrews and Gus Edwards, along with Rashad Bateman, who's already been ruled out. Where would you rank Isaiah Likely, Paulsen, knowing that he would then start for Andrews?
He looked good in that last game with Andrews knocked out early. That was a heartbreaking situation. In my FFPC league, we picked up Likely in case Andrews couldn't play. Andrews was healthy or enough to play, and then he gets knocked out with a different injury, and Likely goes off for 22 points on our bench. We, of course, lose the game, but such is life. I think Likely would be ranked top 7 or 8. Like looking at with all the tight ends out this week, you have Kelsey, Andrews would be out of the picture. Ertz, Goedert would be the only 3 that I would start for sure over him. And then you're getting into, Tanyan, Everett, Higbee, Hill, Taysom Hill, Kyle Pitts as kind of an equitable type start. So I think if you have Likely and Andrews is out, you're very likely starting him.
And one note on Kyle Pitts is the 32% target share got there this week, but the target share, the routes run have never been the issue. What we were really trying to do for the Falcons offense is project if Marcus Mariota is going to throw 28 pass attempts per game. And I don't think that will happen. So I'm still quite down on Pitts. Sam, if Cooper Kupp is out, we think he'll play. Right now, 4-4's Adam Hutchinson believes Cooper Kupp will play. But if he does not, where would you then rank Allen Robinson?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think it's probably wide receiver 3 territory. They did get Van Jefferson back this past week. So I think there's no way that Stafford is going to hyper target Robinson like he does Cooper Kupp. And this offense just has been abysmal. They rank dead last in EPA per play on the season, and the Bucs defense doesn't look nearly as good as it did in the past, but are still, I think, an about average defense as well. So it's one of the games with one of the lowest totals on the week. I'd be looking for other options. Again, probably a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 for Robinson, even if Cooper Kupp is out.
Any movement then, Paulsen, if Kupp is ruled out, for Ben Skowronek as well, who I think may be an option to start in like these deeper FFPC leagues, given all the buys?
Yeah, I mean, if you're taking Kupp out of that offense, then everybody's moving up, but Stafford's moving down. So the passing pie is lower. They're just not going to be as effective without him on the field. I mean, you could make a case for any of these guys to start, but really Tyler Higbee's the only one that I would have any confidence in. Maybe Robinson to a certain degree, since he plays, so many snaps and is out there, that some of these targets would have to go to him just because he's out there. We don't know for sure how healthy Van Jefferson is relative to Skowronek, but I wouldn't feel confident starting either of those guys against the Bucs. I mean, Robinson and Higbee really is it.
How confident would you be on KJ Osborn, given that Adam Thielen dealing with a bruised knee, Irv Smith out for the next 8 to 10 weeks, and TJ Hockenson learning the playbook? We would think Osborn, again, I keep repeating, especially in week 9, enters the fray as a wide receiver 3 or 4 if starting.
Yeah, I think when you drafted Osborn, you're looking at him like a Boyd, where you get some spot start ability, and then you've got 2 receivers ahead of him that potentially could get injured, and then they're moving into a number 2 role. And we're seeing what Boyd's doing with that. And Osborn, we know, is also talented. So certainly if Thielen is out or limited, Osborn's going to move way up in the rankings as the number 2 option there. And, Hawkinson's still trying to find a place to live. Thielen tends to play through this stuff, so we'll see. But certainly Osborn is an option if he's out.
And Sam, I'm going to have both of you speak on it, but I'll allow you to lead off on the Falcons backfield since Cordarrelle Patterson activated 21 day window or activated from IR? I think I may have misheard the reporting and the wording.
It's the 21 day window he's into. He's not yet activated.
So no guarantee that he plays, but eligible to be activated ahead of Sunday. What, if anything, are you doing with the Falcons backfield? Let's say, assuming Patterson's back.
I would expect them to lean heavily on Patterson again if they truly believe that he's fully healthy in the 4 games that he started earlier this year. When he was healthy, was averaging over 15 opportunities per game, had 3 rushing touchdowns as well. I don't think Tyler Algier or Caleb Huntley have really done anything to, garner a bigger workload with Patterson back. They've both been fine, but nothing amazing by any means. But again, we've seen that we now know that the Falcons are going to continue to run the ball and pound it down teams' throats. So I think Patterson, when he returns, is again going to shift into a running back 2 type role.
Against the Chargers, Paulsen, any final thoughts on the Falcons backfield?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at, if you've been holding Patterson this whole time, which I have in Scott Fishbowl, things went about as well as you could hope for. Tyler Algier did not run away with the job, 3.9 yards per carry, remained the lead back over Caleb Huntley, who actually did run the ball pretty well, 4.6 yards per carry, had a nice game last week. I think ideally you get into a Patterson-Huntley backfield if you're this team, because Algier just hasn't been there on a per carry basis, but he's been okay. But I think Patterson's role is safe, and he had 340 yards on 58 carries, 5.9 yards per carry. Obviously, we know he can catch the ball, and they're an extremely run-heavy team, so I would expect him to be a big part of this offense. And they've been competitive. They've stuck around in games and continue to run the ball. So I would expect him RB2, moving forward, and watching him run out to practice here. I got some video of that up on Twitter. He's got that swag, so he looks good to me. Knee scope is something I had twice in college for basketball. It was a 3-week injury, and I was back in week 4. So I would expect Patterson to be out there based on my own experience.
No excuse for Patterson not to return, given your experience in college basketball from knee injury. Sam, what else do you have for everyone on the site?
Yeah, hopping to conclusions out this morning. The breakout model coming tomorrow morning. Twitter is filled with charts, and we've got some NBA stuff up now. Plenty of new NBA tools for those interested in that, and continuing to, just feed the beast. Like
the NBA, I've also had questions in my chats about streaming for week 12 quarterbacks that it's I can't even comprehend given all the changes going on every single day. Just I work 48 hours at a time and a quarter mile at a time. Paulsen, what else do you have on the site for everyone this week?
I did post some bonus content this week. Wrote about a paragraph for each of these trades, trade impact, which is free to read for everybody, not behind the paywall. So check that out. Sneaky starts will be up today, and of course the podcast on Friday, and just keeping up with all the rankings. Stay tuned for Paulsen and Anthony to be back to close up those matchup questions for you on Friday. TJ Hernandez and I will also be back for DFS content Friday afternoon, 6:30 p.m. Eastern live. Our Halloween sale is over, but I bet if you DM me on Twitter at @NowJDaigle, I bet we can still probably get you a discount. The season still has over half of it remaining, more than enough time to still go out and win your league. But until then, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.